Hello everyone, this is Rogue Empire. Now this game is a roguelike, as you can probably tell, a proper sort of classic style roguelike, turn-based, tile-based, all that stuff, and it was in early access for quite a time. I actually first learned about it from Rogue Basin when it had just sort of been released. I'm not even sure if it was on Steam yet, it may have been, but it was in pretty early stages at the time, and I got really interested in it already because of the art style and the sort of the character creation being somewhat complex, and it really just reminded me of ToME, Tales of Majal, which I've covered on this channel before, which is one of my favorite roguelikes. I absolutely adore that game, so obviously something that gives me the same kind of vibes was something that I was very interested in. However, now it's been out, actually released for a little while, it's no longer in early access, so I figured it's about time I finally get around to taking a look at it. Now that I've got my hands on it, I'm noticing it's kind of like an in-between of something like Dungeons of Dredmore, the more, I guess you could say, casual. It's not an easy game, it's still a roguelike, but it's an easier, simpler, but very enjoyable sort of beginner-friendly roguelike, and something like ToME, which is much more complex, but still graphical, and has a lot of options for character creation, a lot of different things that you can do because of the huge variety of abilities and equipment and stuff in that game. So it's like a middle ground between those two. Rogue Empire is sort of in the middle between the somewhat user-friendliness and ease of play, and also, of course, the shorter, different runs, as Dungeons of Dredmore with the more difficult, more complex, more long-lasting, and open world, basically, kind of thing that ToME has going on. So it's a pretty interesting game, and so far I've actually really enjoyed it. Now I have two different sort of campaigns in the background that you'll be seeing. I have one is like a sort of pre-made campaign that you play a specific character with a specific name, and actually it's sort of like the game's tutorial, you could say. It's not exactly a tutorial, but it's a very good place to start, because the warrior, of course, being an easier class to learn, as with pretty much any roguelike ever. And it just has a bit more of a kind of margin for error, since you have a lot more health and more armor and stuff like that, so it's a good way to sort of learn the game. It's a 20-level dungeon that's like a good introduction to the mechanics, and then later on you'll see a mage, some mage gameplay, because I decided to actually, after I did the warriors, I decided to go down to the normal sort of, the standard campaign that actually generates your world and allows you to go across all your hopeful quests and probably die. And I decided to choose a mage because I love playing mages in a lot of games, so, why not? And there's a lot to the character creation in this game. There's not a lot of, appearance customization or anything like that, which is standard for a roguelike. You generally can't change how you look, but there is a lot of options in terms of what you can actually do. So there are 5 different classes to choose from, and there are 7 races to choose from. Each of the races are quite different from each other and have a lot of different penalties and advantages, and of course the classes will work along with these. You generally, as with any sort of RPG, you want to try and choose a complementary set of race and class, although if you want to play, like an elf warrior or whatever, it's not really recommended, but you can, and since it's a roguelike, you will probably have a lot of fun dying as that sort of combination, trying to see what you can make happen. That's just sort of how these games work. But some of the races are pretty inventive, actually. There's one that are basically like tree people, with no better way to describe it, and they even have like a hardy resistance because of their bark-like skin, but they do have a weakness to fire, so be careful, you don't want to burn yourself. So the gameplay takes place, as you can probably tell, in the sort of standard tile-based, turn-based roguelike system, where every turn of yours is also a turn of the entire world, so everything has simultaneous turns. It is not like a JRPG or anything. If you've never played a roguelike before, it is turn-based, but the turn is everyone's turn. The whole world goes by one certain amount of unit of time. And it also has, I guess it's similar to ADOM or ToME, in that you have a fairly large world map that you can go to, and then on the world map are peppered all sorts of different dungeons and towns and stuff that you can visit, some optional, some not, along your journey, and you'll have a little symbol that represents how difficult the monsters are in that dungeon, which I really appreciate, because that's something that some roguelikes admittedly don't do as well. That's one of their probably most user-unfriendly aspects, is trying to judge how difficult something is just from looking at it. And some roguelikes actually do this in a certain way. Like, for instance, ToME, when you walk into an area, you get a little blurb in the text box that says like how you feel when you walk into it. If you feel really relaxed because there are things in here of a much lower level than you, or if you feel like kind of average because there'll probably be a general at your level, or if you feel like super afraid and should probably leave because everything's going to kill you in like 2 hits. And this game does a similar thing, only less vague, I guess you could say, because it just straight up says the enemies here are way below your level, or around your level, or much higher than your level, so leave right now, and stuff like that. So it gives you a nice Well, it's good for newer players of roguelikes that haven't fully gotten used to the way that these systems work, because it helps you much better gauge how difficult an area is going to be before you just wander into it and get slammed against the wall repeatedly. The itemization in a roguelike is pretty important because there are usually tons of items to find. Some of them can be like randomly generated artifacts, often termed rand arts in like roguelike parlance, going way back to the 80s, and there are a lot of those. There are just general items. There are items that have a color in their name, which is basically like a sort of action RPG rarity system, only since it's a roguelike it works a little bit different, but generally speaking those will have similar stats to the normal version, but will have extra additional stats like, increasing your main stats like strength and agility and intelligence, or they might have some other stuff, like adding extra armor points to themselves or things like that. So there's quite a bit of variety in the actual equipment, and then there are, of course, the artifact style equipment that's generally in a game like this, which they are not random or anything. They have like a specific name and specific stats that they always have when you find them. There's nothing like generated about them. And they are, of course, very, very powerful. And if you're able to find one of these sort of unique or artifact type items, then you'll be in a really good spot if, of course, they are for your character, if they're something that you would use. Now, the leveling system is actually pretty unique for a roguelike. I don't think I've ever seen one that's quite like this in terms of what it does. So when you level up, you gain the traditional like increase to HP and MP if you have MP, and different increases to each of your stats. And luckily it does actually tell you, which is something that some roguelikes are actually kind of bad at, admittedly. In this case, it's actually pretty good at it, and you're about to see it right here. It tells you what each stat is increased to, if it increases at all, depending on your race and class and stuff, so you always know how you're growing as a character. You will also have a choice between 4 different what are called contemplations, which are sort of like additional bonuses that you can get for that level. You'll always get one of these at each level. They can be anything from just increasing one of your stats an additional point to getting new gear in your inventory, like some runes that you can exchange for like legendary gear, to getting more rations for food, because of course it is a roguelike, so you have to eat. And a couple of other things like that. And then occasionally on certain levels, depending on your race and stuff, you'll also be, as you saw there, able to select some cards. And they have rarities, as you can tell by the borders around the cards. So like a gray border is sort of basic common rarity, up to like these really intricate like golden orangey borders, which are like legendary cards. And these are basically like perks, you could say, although they're not always like perks because some of the time they are perks, as in like the classic, it is a passive effect that once you choose it, it is on you all the time. It's some sort of passive increase to your abilities in some sense. Other times they are actually new skills, new actual active skills that you can use. Like for instance, you may get one that's just a +6 to your spell power. So that's just a huge sudden burst, permanent increase to the power of your spell. So that's a nice one. And then other times you might get one that's, say, like First Aid, which is an actual usable active ability that goes on your ability bar down there. And you can use it to heal yourself and also sometimes cure poison and some other stuff like that. Although it takes a lot of energy, which means you will get hungry, basically. Energy seems to be the sort of method the game uses to say how much something is going to affect your hunger meter. The hunger is pretty standard for a roguelike. As you explore around, you will lose more and more hunger, although there is a certain element to it that's pretty interesting. You actually have health, and I don't mean like HP health. I mean you actually have like a general how healthy your character is, represented by that little green heart below your portrait. And just hovering over this will tell you how hungry you are from a 0 to 100% sort of status. And obviously when you eat, it increases the percentage, so you're less hungry. But one additional pretty cool effect to that is if you keep yourself well fed regularly, you will actually be healthy, and you will get healthier if you continue to not get too full and also not get too hungry. You just sort of keep yourself in the middle and balance your activities with eating and make sure that you never actually get full or, well, never too full, like bloated full. It actually affects your character negatively if you eat too much, or you never get too hungry. And if you stay in this sort of healthy status for long enough and stay full and well-fed, you will actually increase your health. You can become very healthy, and you can become extremely healthy. So it gives you a bonus for actually keeping up on your nutrition, technically you could say, for a long period of time that actually will give bonuses to your character. And the pretty cool thing about this is the bonuses depend on your class. So for instance, for a warrior, being healthy always increases your HP and MP a little bit. The healthier you get, the more max HP and MP it adds to you, but there is another class-based variable that it can increase as well. So for a warrior, your hit chance will go up. I guess because you're not hungry, so you can focus on smacking things around a little bit more. And if you're a mage, for instance, your chance to learn spells will go up, which is important because that's the main way you actually get new magic. You actually have to either get spell books, get scrolls, or get wands, and you can actually learn the spells from them, although books have a very high chance to learn depending on your intelligence, whereas wands have a bit of a penalty, and scrolls have an even larger penalty, and they're actually very hard to learn from unless you have like a good temporary bonus, like a potion of intelligence or something that will up your chance temporarily to learn from them. I recommend using one of those if you're going to learn from a scroll. And yeah, that's how learning spells works. It's a pretty cool system, actually. The magic in this game in general is pretty cool because it feels quite powerful, but it also is it affects your character, you know, because you have mana, obviously, but it also, that spends energy, so you will get more hungry more quickly if you're not careful, if you just spam spells all the time. And also you have this arcane thread system. You can see that little 10 out of 10 underneath the mana bar there, and that's not the score that IGN gave this game. It is actually a arcane thread system, and different spells cost a different amount of threads. I guess it sort of like symbolizes your connection to magic and the ability to actually warp the world around you. And as this gets lower, you will be unable to cast certain spells no matter how much MP you actually have. You know, you may have like 60 MP left for a spell that costs 20, but if you don't have any threads left over to actually use, you still won't be able to, you know, summon the power to actually change things and cast the spell, which is a pretty neat system, actually. It makes spells feel more impactful, you could say, because they're not super spammable, since it's not just about having a ton of mana and mana potions to just constantly be like a mana battery and throwing fireballs everywhere. It's actually based around this thread system that gives you a sort of hard limit, like a ceiling to what you can actually cast, and it makes things that affects your thread count feel very powerful because it's such a hard limit to the power that you have as a mage or a druid. There's also a druid that uses the same sort of system, but of course has a lot of nature-y spells, and naturally the ability to shapeshift into various different forms for various different reasons. I actually really need to play a druid because it seems like a lot of fun. I haven't actually experienced it yet. There's also a system of exploration for the world map. What you're seeing right now is mostly just in an actual dungeon or a couple of dungeons, but you can, as I mentioned, just move out to a larger world map, and you use a lot more energy when moving around because, of course, it's like moving a much farther distance per step since you're on a world map, so that's the theme there. And also, different types of terrain will affect how much energy you actually spend moving through it. You know, moving on roads is really, really easy. Moving through a grassland is pretty easy. Moving through like a dense forest is much more difficult. And there are also various events and encounters, things that can happen on the world map, as well as a certain an exploration rating, which is pretty cool because it sort of symbolizes your character's knowledge of the area. And as you explore an area, you'll see this little percent above your character's head that will tell you how much of this biome basically you've explored. And once this actually gets full, you will spend very little energy going around the area, which I think symbolizes the fact that you sort of know it's safe, or you know your way around it right now, so you don't need to expend so much energy actually exploring, you're just traveling through, which is a little bit different. This makes the idea of like returning to previous areas / backtracking a much better concept, I think, because you will be able to actually fully explore an area and thus, you know, not have as much of a problem going back through it a second time if you need to, or return to a previous town or whatever. And there are also lots of optional places that you can find, like dungeons and the like, that you can go into for side quests or just because you can, to try and kill some things, get some experience and some loot and stuff like that. So in that sense, it feels a lot like ToME and ADOM. I think this is very much a game that is inspired heavily by both of those games, and in a very good way, because it still is its own game and it is very different from those, but it does bring to mind those games and the feeling that they give you, which is great because those are awesome games. Both ToME and ADOM are fantastic roguelikes. I actually have not covered ADOM on this channel. I really need to go do that right now. Ancient Domains of Mystery, if you've never heard of it, it's fantastic, and that's one of the older roguelikes that's still in active development. It's pretty impressive. It's been around, I think it might have actually been around for longer than I've been alive. I think it might have been around since like the mid or late 80s or so. I can't fully remember, but it's been around a long time, either way. And so yeah, that is Rogue Empire. It's a really interesting roguelike that's actually very well done sort of foray into this larger kind of open world exploration based roguelike, like, you know, games like ToME and ADOM have, and I suppose also Angband have done before it. So it's a really good effort, and I really recommend it. It's available for $15 right now on Steam. The link is, as always, in the description below this video. And as I mentioned, it was an early access game, but it is no longer. It has actually come out, and the developer has, I think it's like a one-man development team, by the way, which is already super impressive. And they have been really releasing a lot of updates for this game. Like, it's had, I want to say, at least like a dozen or so pretty sizable like quality of life / bug fix / additional changes and things since it is actually just released. That's not counting the ones that it got in early access as it developed. So it is a very active game still, and it's got a lot to it. I highly recommend it. It's a very enjoyable roguelike that is a nice middle ground between something super complex and difficult and something a lot easier and in like playable in shorter bursts. Thank you guys very much for watching this video. If you liked it, feel free to hit the like button. If you did not, feel free to hit the dislike and tell me why. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.